as a physician, one of the things that I'm always concerned about are disparity issues regarding healthcare delivery services to minority populations. And, you know, when we look at a number of health issues in the country, particularly as it relates to African Americans, we notice major differences in the incidence of illnesses, particularly HIV, AIDS, mental illness, substance abuse, violence. And those things tend to be much higher in African Americans than the general population. So some of the questions that may develop include, you know, why is that true? Is it because there's something, some genetic, physiologic, structural, or cultural aspect or characteristic of African Americans that result in our having more substance abuse, violence, HIV, AIDS, et cetera, et cetera? And the answer to those questions is that no, there aren't. There are no, other than sickle cell disease, there are really no genetic or medical reasons why we would have certain other illness and diseases than the general population. There are, if we look at cultural factors, then there perhaps may be some understanding of how we could have more violence. But most of the things, you know, in my experience, most of the things that happen in the African American community that are very negative or very adverse are things that we get some help in. I mean, the negative things that exist, we got some help in the creation of those negative things. And it's so interesting to me because I work with adolescent boys and girls every day. And it's so interesting to me that a lot of times decisions that they make to engage in behaviors that result in adverse consequences for them, they actually believe that they're the ones who really are really making the decision to do whatever it is that they do without being aware of the extent to which they've been conditioned to think a certain way, behave a certain way, do a certain thing, and not only think a certain way, do a certain thing, but to do it at a certain time and in a certain way. And sometimes I tell them, I say, you know, I get the feeling that you guys are being pimped, you know. And when I say that, they hate it, you know. And I say, you know, you guys act like a bunch of hoes, you know. I say you walk around every day, you know. I say you take all of the money you get and you give it to somebody else, and they don't like it. But we get a lot of help. We get a lot of help through videos, through movies, through music, through a lot of media kinds of things, and we could talk about that for a long time. Our other panelist is here. Our third panelist is here. His name is George Patterson, so I won't talk anymore about that. But of course, since I did raise the issue about disparity in healthcare, I have to point out that there are some disparities that are related to our patterns of seeking healthcare and our patterns of we frequently don't go to the doctor maybe as often as we should or when we should, and don't practice prevention as much as we should. But a lot of times we get help with that too, because the media does tend to influence us in such a way that we eat things, drink things, and do other things that that's not really healthy. You know, initially we were going to talk about marketing negative behaviors. And I was thinking about that. I said, marketing negative behavior. I said, okay, that makes sense. You know, because what is marketing? Marketing is to influence a person to do what you want them to do, when you want them to do it, in the way you want them to do it. Right. Makes sense? Okay. Particularly if you are controlling things, You're got an agenda of wealth, then, and if you have some understanding about human behavior, and if you understand that you can influence a person's thinking and their perception and what they do and how they do it and when they do it, why not? Especially if they don't have it. If your agenda is wealth, but let's say they don't have an agenda, they just walking around, just living the life, trying to, why not influence them to do what you want them to do? Why not influence them to take their money and spend it on what you want them to spend it on, when you want them to spend it? Makes sense to me. If you up here, okay? So one of the things that I know, if you have access to a person's attention in their brain, their mind, and you have an opportunity to present them with certain information, and if they're not really good at critical thinking, then, hey, you can get them to do what you want them to do, whenever you want them to do. And if you can do that, imagine the economic benefit. Imagine the political benefit. Imagine being able to know and predict that X number of people on a certain day, a certain time are going to spend X amount of money. Hey, why wouldn't you do that? Now, it's so interesting that a lot of media influence has come about during a time when the school systems have kind of reduced efforts to teach children how to be critical thinkers. So you have them you have them so you're not teaching them how to critically think. Then you bombarding their mind with stuff. Then you do it in such a way that you glamorize drugs, getting high, having gold, having a bad car, having a lot of women, being preoccupied with greed, materialism, sex, violence, good times. So, and if they're not thinking, why not? Why not get them to do what you want them to do? So one of the major challenges for us in continuing the Freedom Summer legacy is to engage in critical thinking ourselves, educate our young people about critical thinking, and help people to understand that brainwashing does exist every day, all day. And brainwashing is essential to maintaining status quo. Brainwashing is important. Mental illness is important. Substance abuse is important. Because and not only that, if you can keep people depressed, anxious, on drugs, then they don't have time or they don't have the propensity to engage in critical thinking. And if you can keep them wanting a whole lot, now they working a job. Now they working 2 jobs for the BMW and the Mercedes and other things. And if people are busy, then they can't raise children. They can't think about what's really going on, what's really influencing their behavior and what they do, how they do, and when they do it. So that was an introduction. So our first panelist is going to be, which one? You want to go first?
I can go first.
Okay.
Sure.
So our first panelist will be Yes, Mabet.
So I'm really happy to be here, and I'm excited to see so many faces in the audience, and especially excited to see so many young people here. My name is Yeshimabet Milner, and I am from Miami, Florida. I'm an organizer with Power U Center for Social Change, and we're a grassroots membership-based organization in Miami, and we work on a range of issues from the school to prison pipeline to what I'm going to talk about today, which is our campaign that we actually just won around increasing resources around breastfeeding for African American mothers in Miami. And so before I go into more about our victory and the details of our campaign, I'm going to talk a little bit about the context of Miami. So what is Miami like in terms of health disparities? What is Miami like economically? And what are the experiences there really of young people, of low-income people, of people of color, as we try to navigate these status quos and this constant marketing and the constant, messages around what we should be doing and what we should be eating, and all of these things. And I think one of the things that you said in particular around about the marketing is especially true for breastfeeding. And I'm going to go into it more because a lot of people know the importance of breastfeeding. We did a survey of 300 mothers in Miami, which was a part of the campaign, where we asked moms how much they knew about breastfeeding, where they were exposed to it, and everybody knew about breastfeeding. Black mothers know about breastfeeding. They understand the importance of breastfeeding. So why aren't Black mothers breastfeeding, right? And one of the issues that we found out was the formula companies, right? We found out that, just from research, from talking to people, and especially from engaging with the service providers and with the state, and the main way that low-income moms have access to benefits and to support once they give birth, that, while people understand the importance of breastfeeding, not many of us, and I can say for myself, I'm college educated, I didn't understand how bad baby formula was, especially for our communities, until I did this. And I got really deep in this work and started organizing moms, and we did all this research, and we published a report last year called A Call for Birth Justice in Miami, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, and also to lift up more of what we were talking about around birth justice and Black infant mortality. And there's a lot more information that we have there, and I can put up a link or something so you guys can check it out. So please, this talk that I'm going to give now doesn't encompass the breadth of what we were doing. But in the report, we talk a lot about the effects of formula, and we talk a lot about, not only the scientifics of it, of how, for example, in Similac, one of the more popular brands of formula, it's made up of 42.6 corn syrup solids. It's made in the same factories and the same companies where Nestle bars are where Snicker bars are being made, and also these same companies, Nestle, they are in a business of aggressively targeting and marketing African American moms. That's their biggest market. They have a huge contract with WIC, Women, Infants, and Children. WIC is actually the number one buyer of baby formula in the country. Yeah, so imagine my surprise as someone who is college educated, who's been in the movement, who's been exposed to this. I was a breastfed baby, and I didn't know any of this. Why? Because it's very, very well hidden, right? It is very well hidden for the purpose of continuing this $35 trillion industry, international formula industry, right? So in 1971, there was a report published by a radical sort of media group in the UK that really, I think, for the first time exposed the extent to the formula marketing, and I think gives us sort of a metaphor for what was happening then and what's happening now. And in the report, folks in an African village, community members reported that walking around their neighborhood were formula saleswomen dressed up in nurses' uniforms. Yep. And this is 1971, and dressed up in sales uniforms, dressed up in nurses' uniforms, salespeople working for Nestle, actually, the same company that makes a lot of the formula that we use today, going in door to door in African villages, in African communities, and Jamaica as well. There was an article in New York Times in the 80s about this, selling formula under the vises of, the health system, that this authority that we should trust, acting as health professionals, acting as, people who swore to protect and to heal, and working under these disguises to really push formula and to really just convince people honestly that their breast milk isn't good enough. Essentially, their inherent ability to mother and their right to parent and their ability to parent wasn't good enough, and that they had to buy this formula or else, their babies wouldn't survive. That they had to, that this is something that they had to get externally. And I say that it's a metaphor for now because, one of the things that we found in our campaign as we were, starting to talk about breastfeeding and starting with just educating moms in the community, having breastfeeding support groups, having educational sessions, just starting from the ground to really build consciousness around breastfeeding, We also saw that we can keep doing this, but what we needed to do was actually target the hospitals, right? What we were seeing was that behind the doors, not only is WIC the number one buyer of formula, but many hospitals had contracts, kickbacks, in fact, with formula companies to where they were getting free formula, and they were able, and then once, they got free formula and possibly other monies, donations, especially the public hospitals, and they were in the business of, and they still are, many hospitals in the country are, marketing formula, right? So when a mom gives birth, especially in Miami, let's use Jackson Memorial Hospital, which is the hospital that we recently got to stop advertising and endorsing and pushing formulas onto moms. Usually moms come home with like 20 cans of formula bottles and like a cute little bag saying Similac or whatever. But they're also told right before discharge, here's why it's important to breastfeed. Most hospitals, whether or not they have these policies in place where they can't market formula, and whether or not they have what we call their baby friendly, which is an international accreditation process that ensures the utmost health standards for moms and babies in hospitals. Most hospitals have a basic level of breastfeeding education. But what's the point of this breastfeeding education when you're also sending moms home with bags of formula, right? You have a doctor telling us one thing, and then you have a doctor also giving us this bag of formula, right? So in a lot of ways, these hospitals are formula salespeople dressed up in nursing uniforms, right? So back to Miami in this specific context. So in Miami, I can go on and about all the disparities and all the things that we face. I mean, in the state of Florida, this is where Trayvon Martin was murdered, right? This is where Jordan Davis was murdered. Power U organization also took over the Capitol with the Dream Defenders when George Zimmerman was acquitted, right? That was more of our work around the school-to-prison pipeline, but I think that gives sort of a context of how, in a lot of ways, the conditions there are quite extreme, and not just in terms of criminalization, and not just in terms of housing inequality, but in terms of health disparities, right? So there are not many resources for low-income moms to breastfeed. They're actually absent, as a matter of fact. When a mom, as I said, goes in to give birth, she is usually given maybe a couple pamphlets about breastfeeding, but then she's sent off with cans of formula. Usually she signs up for WIC, and she goes to WIC, and she is given more formula, right? So that creates the cycle, that creates the disparity that we now see, honestly, as Black infant mortality. And a lot of people don't understand. It took me a while to understand the exact connection between formula companies and Black infant mortality. But again, when you understand the science, number one, of baby formula, you understand the science of breast milk. Breast milk is especially magically made to respond to the needs of the baby. If babies are breastfed within the first few days of being born, there is a special liquid in the breast milk called colostrum that builds immunity, and it has all the antibodies that a baby needs to survive those first few days. Many babies are not getting that, okay? And it happens that in this country, the babies that aren't getting that are Black babies. That is the reality of the situation. Black moms have the lowest rates of breastfeeding, and Black babies aren't getting breast milk. They're more prone to be breastfed. And a lot of it is, as I said, because of infant formula marketing, right? So you have these corporations, you have this extreme corporate influence, and you have the scientific health realities of what exactly baby formula is, right? And I think for us, that's not the whole, that doesn't answer the question of why, Black babies today are 3 times more likely to die than white babies before their first birthday. And it definitely doesn't answer the reason why that disparity, 3 times more likely, has not changed over the past 50 years, right? So while infant mortality has gone down significantly nationwide as a whole over the past 50 years, Black infant mortality as a disparity between Black and white has stayed the exact same, right? So what we found was that, okay, we're community organizers. What can we do, right? We organize parents. we got a group of moms together, got a group of our leaders together, and we thought about how could we do a campaign that had a real solid policy goal, but also built and leveraged the leadership of moms in the community, right? Because we knew that without the leadership of those directly affected, Black moms, Black families, Black fathers, Black brothers, Black sisters, we were not going to see the changes that we needed to see to save our children, right? So fast forward to now. Recently, as I said, we were able to win the campaign. We were able to get the largest public hospital in the country, which is Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami-Dade, Florida, to become the first in Florida, I think the first in the South, and probably one of the first, I think possibly the first public hospital in the country to become baby friendly and to ban the marketing and endorsement of baby formula, right? That's what, yeah. So, and you know, this is a big victory and everything, and this was great, but I'm telling you, it took years. It took years. It took before I was still in high school when this campaign was first started by a couple of midwives in our organization, right? So that's where it started, with a couple of midwives and a few leaders, high school students, moms, who came together and saw what was happening and who went to the hospitals. You know, women in our community, low-income women. You know, one of our members, you know, one of the biggest leaders, I can tell her story a bit, Dontravia. She was sort of the visionary behind the campaign and the visionary behind the survey that we did that really built up the evidence and the legitimacy that actually helped us win the campaign. Because when you're interfacing with the hospitals, you have to come with evidence, you have to come with the statistics. A lot of times the stories isn't enough, but we were able, you know, with Dontravia's leadership, to survey 300 moms in Miami, asking them about their experiences in hospitals, asking them about what they knew about breastfeeding, whether they had access to breastfeeding, resources, whether they, you know, what kind of formula they used, what they knew about baby formula, etc. And Dontravia was particularly invested in this campaign because she gave birth at a young age. She gave birth in high school, and she had her child, and while she was giving birth, she had major complications, specifically around preeclampsia, and it also turned out that her baby, Courtney, was premature. So, you know, Courtney was under the care of the hospital after she was born. And Wick, you know, who was sort of providing the primary care and support to her in taking care of Courtney, and then specifically addressing her needs as a baby that was born with special needs, advised her a certain type of formula to give. They told her that she could not breastfeed because she had preeclampsia, right? It wasn't until she came to Power U and started working with community breastfeeding educators and working with folks in our team there, and learning with us all that was actually a lie, right? So she could have breastfed. But that's not where this all ended. So it turned out that the formula that Courtney had been given she was actually gravely allergic to. Everyone was wondering, why was Courtney still sick? What was happening? What was going on? You know, why is it after a year of hospital care, of so much attention, that she was not getting better? You know, and it wasn't until Dontravia, being the leader that she is, outspoken person that she is, she marched into the offices at WIC, at the hospital, at Jackson, and said, what's going on? What is it? What is this? What's happening? She had built a relationship with the head of the WIC office, one of the staff members, a doctor there, and he said, well, Dontravia, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but Courtney's allergic to this formula, you know, and this is making her worse, you know, and there's all this legal stuff pending around that, but most importantly, what I think Dontravia got out of that, and I think what we learned from that, and what was the result of that, was not only just this campaign, but this very, very, very heightened awareness over exactly how systematic, how institutionalized, and how pervasive this issue is, right? And it's not just in the hospitals, and it's not just in the hospitals. One of our other leaders gave birth in prison. She was incarcerated. She gave birth to her daughter during a 5-year sentence for, I think, something is she was sentenced for 5 years. I don't remember exact the charge, but it was, in Florida, we also have a problem where we over-sentence black women. I'm sure folks are familiar with Merce Alexander's case. And a mom, a recent mother who was sentenced, who's actually being sentenced now almost for 60 years for responding in the right way to her husband threatening her and a whole domestic violence thing and defending herself in her own home, right? So sentencing of black women is a big problem, and especially the experiences of black mothers in prison is a huge problem. So she never had a chance to breastfeed. She didn't know about breastfeeding, That wasn't an option to her, right? And these are, we have plenty of stories, we have plenty more anecdotes, but, us learning that this is bigger and greater than one person, it's bigger, greater than two people, it's even bigger and greater than the state of Florida, right? So all of these things come together, and Don Travia starts this vision around the survey, and we start doing the survey, and then we start deciding, okay, we're building this evidence, we have this survey, but what is a specific policy goal that we can actually do? And then we started doing more research, and we came across this campaign called Ban the Bags campaign, right? And Ban the Bags campaign was actually started by this woman, Marsha Walker, this suburban upper middle class white woman in Boston who is a huge breastfeeding activist and also a huge activist against the formula companies. And her organization started this campaign to honestly bring light in a world that's very much clouded by corporate influence and this extreme marketing to what the formula companies were doing, and specifically the role of hospitals in that, right? So they radical upper middle class, white women from Boston, ironically, they did an action where they dumped 500,000 or 500, baby formula gift bags from hospitals into the river, like the Boston Tea Party action, right? Right, so that's sort of what we were trying to model our campaign off of, but us also realizing that, this campaign was a part of a network of all these other campaigns that were mainly led by breastfeeding coalitions, lactation consultants, health professionals. We were the only African-American, grassroots, very tiny budget, very small staff organization doing a fight like this. And we've been the only one in the past year that's won a Ban the Bags campaign in Miami, or in the nation, as a matter of fact. And so I'm going to start to wind down my comments because I want to have time for you folks to ask me questions. I know I've said a lot in the past few minutes, and I know a lot of these terms are sort of technical too, so I want to invite people to ask as many questions as I can. But, when we were in the meeting with the hospital, right? So this is the meeting, this is D-Day. After years of organizing and years of trying to get a meeting with the hospital, right? We were years. All we wanted, our main objective and our main, goal was, if we need to get a meeting where we can interface with the head decision maker, that be the hospital CEO, that be whoever decides around the marketing and around the formula. Because this shouldn't be that controversial of a campaign, Why is this that big of a deal? Why is it so, such of a big issue to stop giving breastfeeding? It's just breastfeeding. It's natural. Why is it so politically contentious and controversial, right? We didn't expect it to be such a long fight. We didn't expect to have doors slammed in our face or even to be threatened at times because of what was happening. But we realized we followed the money, and we had a whole legal plan where we, that was successful, and folks can ask me more details later on about how exactly our campaign went, and I can share all information if people are interested in leading similar fights in their communities. But once we finally got to the table with the head nurse, with the hospital CEO, with the corporate media people, with all the decision-making powers at the hospital, and this is the largest public hospital in the country, we brought our evidence, we brought everything that we had, and, it worked, right? They saw the survey, but most importantly, they saw the survey, they saw the report, but most importantly, they heard the stories firsthand, right? And they understood, and as we framed and as our main messaging was, you guys are supposed to be leaders You guys are supposed to be health leaders. We trust your leadership. It is an expectation. You guys are federally funded. This is your responsibility. You have to step up, right? That's how we brought it to them. And they took it and they acknowledged it. And sort of at the end of the conversation, at the end of the meeting, the hospital head nurse said, you know what? We didn't expect this meeting to go like this. You guys have actually done amazing work. And it seems like there is a lot that we can learn from you. And we said, absolutely. Everybody in our organization, we have 100% breastfeeding rate, We are the ones who are working one-on-one with your main constituents, with low-income mothers. That's what public hospitals are for. They're specifically for low-income people. Yes, and most importantly, what we have that you guys don't have is we have the expertise and leadership of Black women, right? If you want to make changes and you specifically want to improve the lives of Black women, you have to have the leadership and expertise of Black women, especially in terms of health, right? It's absolutely necessary, And right now we're in a relationship where we're continuing to build with them, but, that's fundamentally what we think was the key to our success. We use the survey to collect stories and collect information and to build this collective knowledge base. And we also, allowed our members to be the visionaries behind what we were doing, right? And I'm going to shift it over because I know like my time is almost over, but I think that was the key to our success. And that's what's going to have to happen if we're going to see the changes that we want to see in terms of health in this country.
Well, we have to all remember now we live in a capitalistic society that focuses on materialism and greed. Men and women will use whatever mechanism that they can to create income-generating activities. One of the questions that you asked me before we started was, what's going to be the agenda for continuing the Freedom Summer legacy? One has to be a health agenda. A person who can say a lot about that is Dr. Robert Smith, who just walked in, who's been providing health care for not 100 years, but almost 100 years. But we have to have a health agenda because the business people, they have an agenda, and their agenda is to make money. And if our health agenda doesn't involve activity, knowledge, information, asking questions, hey, if I can get you to feed your baby Coca-Cola all day long, if you don't know any better, I'm selling you Coca-Cola, okay? So we need to have a health agenda. That was very excellent. We'll hold the questions till later. Our next speaker will be Ashley Jackson, and Ashley is with LGBT.
I'll take that. So, we all recognize that the conversation is a little bit different than what we expected it to be, but it was fascinating. We were talking about this as I was driving over here, not 10 minutes before I even pulled into the parking lot. I was listening to the radio, and, I'm having a good time, dancing, singing along to myself, and then a McDonald's commercial comes on. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure some of you may have heard this commercial, and it was a mother who, I'm assuming we'll say this is a Black family. And the mother saying how proud she is of her baby who just signed a $1 million basketball contract. And how they just had this great party and now he's got all this money and he went to McDonald's and bought everybody something from the dollar menu. And how basically it was, you may have as much money as you want, but you're going to spend it on what you love. And I was absolutely appalled. Absolutely appalled that this is what we're saying. So we're saying that you make this $1 million using your body because you are an athlete. That is your instrument. But they're saying put this McDonald's food into your body because that's what's going to get you that $1 million contract. And what in the world are we doing? What is happening? How is that an acceptable message? But the problem is that somebody accepted that and somebody said, yeah, sure, we'll put that on the radio. Because they got paid. Right, exactly. Exactly. They got their money. So, as it was mentioned before, I work in the LGBT community, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. Most of the work I do is with young people. That's where I started out working with teenagers. I had, young students that I was working with that were having really, really hard time. They were not safe at school. Many of them were not safe at home. And so, you think about it, so then these kids kind of end up also in a space of being pushed into that school to prison pipeline because they're not able to focus at school. So then that means that you don't have a safe space at home, you don't have a safe space at school, and then you just end up being pushed out or pushed into all of these unhealthy spaces. That also kind of feeds into the lack of mental health care that a lot of these young people are getting. Some of them are even able to see counselors, they're able to talk to school counselors, but they're also being told that the way they feel, the emotions they have, how they identify is a sickness. And so then that needs to be cured. So now you already have this young person who's trying to figure out, what in the world am I going to do? Who am I exactly? And then they're being told that who you are is wrong. And so you need to go to somebody to fix you. When you put that on top of a lack of proper sex education in schools, you end up with this huge population of people who are being told to hide who you really are. And then you kind of end up exploding and you get yourself into some very unhealthy situations. The state of Mississippi has some of the highest infection rates of STIs and STDs, especially of young Black people, 13 years old, 15, 16 years old. And then we're also in a space where there's an absolute lack of health care. So what do we do about that? Again, working with young people, sometimes I find that I want to be kind of that mother hen, and I want to, really help and give a hug. But then I'm also realizing that you are a young person, but you are in an adult body almost. And so we have to figure out what that looks like and not sugarcoat what's happening. We have to not sugarcoat what other people are going to want to do with your body and how you can safely manage what you are able to do with your body. And as you said, not get pimped out by whomever that might be, by organizations, by other people. So I work for the Human Rights Campaign. I lead up the Alabama initiatives. One of the things that we work on is healthcare equality index. And so what we do, we evaluate all of the hospitals in the country. They have an option to, they're going to be evaluated anyway, but they have the option to say, hey, what can we do to get our score higher to make sure we're supporting all families? There's a man I worked with in Alabama, his name's Paul Hard. He and his husband were married in Massachusetts. They live in Alabama. They work in Alabama. They pay taxes in Alabama. They love Alabama. The state of Alabama does not recognize their relationship. Paul's husband was killed in a car accident. Paul got to the hospital, and no one would talk to him. They wouldn't tell him a thing until a family member showed up. After hours and hours of waiting, an orderly finally said, well, he died, right? That's how he found out his husband was dead. The fact of the matter is, one of the things that we do with this healthcare quality index, we are working with hospitals and saying, you need to make sure all of families are respected at all times. So there's actually still a lawsuit right now, but the fact is that we're working with these young people. It's kind of hard to say who you are is okay. It's all right to be yourself when we have society saying you're wrong, you do not deserve to be protected, you do not deserve the same rights. So what's going to make anybody want to be a productive member of society if you're being told that half or 25 or 75% of how you identify doesn't fit into this box? So you might as well not even try. And that's really frustrating, and that's really hard, especially being in this space and seeing what young people did 50 years ago.
Right.
What young people did, and the fact that so many of the young people don't know that they were young people that led the civil rights movement is frustrating, because they're not being told that you have power.
Right.
And you don't have to put up with what other people say you have to do. You can change the climate. You can change the conversation. So being able to protect these young people and to talk to them and figure out the best way that they can express themselves in a healthy manner, and to make sure that families are protected, it's extremely important that we're doing that. And it's tough. It's definitely tough doing that in Mississippi, Alabama, but it has to be done. And we have a large community here of folks that are ready to work. We have a large community of folks here that are looking at, I'm hearing protesting out here. I'm excited about it. I'm getting pumped up a little bit. But either way, the bulk of my work is working in the LGBT community, especially working on, we talk about comprehensive sex ed. In the state of Alabama, there is no sex ed, basically. And if LGBT folks are talked about, and this is a law in Alabama, if an LGBT person is mentioned, the person that's teaching this class has to say that this is an illegal practice and it is not an acceptable lifestyle. Yes, this is a law on the books in Alabama. So what's that going to make a young person think when you're in this classroom and you're not being taught anything about sex ed? You're just being taught, don't do it. If you do it, you'll get AIDS and you'll die, which is what folks are saying. So how do we tell young people, how do we work through any of this? How do we make sure they are safe? And how do we get these infection rates down? It's not going to happen if we don't have some type of policy change when we're talking about healthcare, starting in schools and when we get into into hospitals and mental health care. I'm going to bring that down. That's what I'm going to say for now. If you have questions, something's burning, you want to talk about something, we can talk about that a little bit later, but I'm going to move on so we can get Chuck. But like I said, a lot of this is about families. It's about safety. And it is about being able to be a productive member of society in the state that you choose to live in. Thank you.
Well, as a treating psychiatrist, I treat children who, gay, lesbian children every day. And it's a very complicated issue. It's very complicated because, number one, children have to deal with themselves, their family members, and then their peers. And if they're courageous enough to say, this is what I am, then they have to be able to endure a lot of the criticism and ostracism and bullying that goes along with it. And if you're in an environment where you're a minority, then you find very few places of refuge and support. So it can be a very devastating mental health problem. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we can do to continue the Freedom Summer legacy is to have a health agenda. And part of that has to include the mental health and the social well-being of young people who are gay, lesbian, etc. So our next presenter will be
George Patterson.
George Patterson. You know, I really wish I had. You know, when you do something for a long time, for a lot of years, you want to feel like you're good at it, and you want to feel like you could. As long as I've been practicing psychiatry, I should be able to resolve problems that come up with young people who are gay or lesbian, and that's one of the most challenging things that I struggle with every day. And the children, first of all, they got to deal with their mama and daddy, who is a Christian, and they say, oh, you're going to go to hell. And then they got to deal with peers and teachers and neighbors and et cetera, et cetera. And it's a very, very challenging thing. But if we remember how important it is to have education, information, organization, then I think eventually we'll be able to come up with some really viable solutions. George is coming next.
I'd like to say thank you for coming to Tougaloo. This is my second home, which has become my first home. I was fortunate enough for my mother to issue a decree to say that you're going to Tougaloo, you're not going to go to Atlanta and try to live with your brother. You're going to go where you have my first cousin. And at that time in 1999, my second cousin, my mother's first cousin, was the first lady of Tougaloo. She was the wife of the president of Tougaloo, Dr. Joe A. Lee. And I graduated from Tougaloo, and then God directed me back here after I finished up grad school in Houston, Texas in 2005. I say that to give you a background so you can see how much this place means to me. I've been working here since 2005. The only other jobs that I've ever had was shoveling concrete with my dad and DJing that I picked up on the side, and I did from the time I was 17. I continue to do it now, and I've passed on that skill of DJing. I haven't passed on the skill of shoveling concrete. I don't wish that on anybody, but I know how to do it. We know how to bury people and make vaults and do all of that. So my background has been in business and dealing with people for basically since I was 10. I work in the Tougaloo College Owens Health and Wellness Center, where we focus on a number of things, not so much just specifically health. We focus on awareness and advocacy, exercise and fitness, nutrition education. We've got programs that cover people that are second graders all the way to senior citizens. On any given day, you can walk into Tougaloo College Owens Health and Wellness Center, and you can see second and third graders from Brown and Walton Elementary walking past senior citizens who have worked in the Jackson Public School System for years, and they're still in the classroom, but they're on the other side of the table. We have intergenerational conversations in the Health and Wellness Center where every day there is somebody learning something about something. All the times it doesn't focus on health directly, but we always try to fit it in somewhere. My specific position, or I guess you say my title, I'm the Director of Campus Life and Community Outreach. So it's been a blend of my life experiences with being influenced by folks who graduate from Tougaloo who work in, I guess you say, the private or the nonprofit sector, and then my first job in student activity. So how my mantra for work, I aim to connect community to campus in everything that I do. And I believe that if everywhere there was a campus and everywhere there's a community, if they're connected, if we didn't have these gates, and if the community took care of the campus and the campus took care of the community, we wouldn't have a lot of these problems. And I think once those conversations start to happen with folks, and I always refer to school days, we don't ever want to have the townies feeling like the kids that have the privilege to go to Tougaloo are looking down on them. It's just all of us are sitting in the classroom at some point. Sometimes the classroom is inside of academia, and then sometimes the classroom is under the tree. I want to speak specifically, or I really want to mention three things: influence, practice makes perfect, and then piss poor preparation promotes piss poor performance. Piss poor performance promotes pain. And what I mean by all of that is the more we practice anything, what do we do? If we practice anything, we get better, right? So if I aim to be the world's most skilled orator, or if I want to throw the tightest spiral, or if I want to make it on the USA World Cup team, then I got to practice. The things that influence our practice is psychology and marketing. So the way that I approach everything and all of the work that I do is basically marketing. As a DJ and as a person who was not from Jackson, who was not from Houston, I had to be able to create my own lane. And that's basically what I did in the Health and Wellness Center. I don't know many health and wellness centers that have a director of campus life. and community outreach. I haven't found another dude or another lady out there that holds that title. So what businesses, organizations, anybody has to do is to create their own lane. And that's one of the things that Coke, that's one of the things that Powerade and all of these most powerful brands that they do. They create their lane for you to come to them and say, we really would like for you to support our conference, our event, XYZ, and then next thing you know, you are running to them to help them pump Coke down your kids' throat. And how do we get to the point where we don't need the Coke money is the question that we have to ask ourselves. How do we get to the point where we don't need whatever the company is, the Nestle money, Mars marketing and all of that? How do we get to that point? One of the things that I always try to do, I approach everything honestly like a party. It's music and marketing that'll be involved in everything that I do. And Miss Monique, she's sitting on the front row, and she's been a part of some of my crazy ideas. Some of them go to the roof. Some of them don't go so well. But one of the things that I've never aimed at doing is quitting. Has anybody ever heard of Coke versus water? Like the email, the Facebook post that's out there? Anybody know? Okay, so, all right. We've got this flyer in the Health and Wellness Center, and this will basically wrap up my comments. We got this flyer in the Health and Wellness Center that says cola versus water. It gives you all of these things that you can use cola for. We pass it out. It's on 4x6 flyers, glossy, and I'm talking about we pushing it like it's Friday night at free lunch, free before 10:30, free drinks if you get there and you bring a friend. And we have college students that go to Jackson State football games. We hit up the festivals and we pushing it. Now, people look at it like, ooh, I had a Coke earlier. And I'm like, okay, well, look, you can use Coke to clean your toilet bowl, or you can use Coke to clean erosion off your battery caps. Really? You can use Coke to get up oil out of your driveway. Baby, how you find all this out? Well, I just really found it on the internet, man, but I'm just telling you what you got in your cup, your 20 ounce or your 12 ounce that can. So now, when we say, when the last time that you drank some water today? Ooh, baby, I ain't had no water all week. I said, I bet your pee go. These are the things that I share with my student leaders on how they should approach people, because if you walk up on a person and they automatically feel like that you're looking down on them, you need to be able to communicate with them at the very instance that your eyes lock. And that's nonverbal communication. So all of that hey, hello, and how y'all doing, that, you've been hitting folks from the South, some of y'all that may not be from here, everybody gonna speak to you, because at some point, I'm gonna end up marketing to you what I'm pushing. Today, we were selling t-shirts. Most people didn't want to buy them t-shirts. We almost sold out right now. Y'all didn't want to buy no t-shirt. What you need another t-shirt for? You got plenty of t-shirts at home. But I had a young man out there yesterday. He had a microphone in his hand. He was making connections. He prepared himself, and its preparation had a great performance. 100 t-shirts sold, and that means that the money sold from the money made from those t-shirts will go to the next Freedom Summer Youth Congress. So it's not like a one-time thing. So literature, merchandising, and all of that, most of us in nonprofit organizations in the private sector, we don't model ourselves after these big businesses and the practices that they have in place already. Me, I'm out here grinding. I've been a DJ since I was 17 years old. I'm 32 years old now. My wife is breastfeeding, and then we're in real life, and I'm helping. I'm like, dude, you better get on there. You better get on it. So my ask of you is that stop running your nonprofit, your community organization like a community organization, and start running it like a guerrilla street team. Start running it like it's 97.7 WRBJ. Programming works. programming works. People don't wake up racist. It's programming. You don't know that song because you like it. You know that song because it's programming. The last thing that I'll say is that you better be mindful of the YouTube, Pandora commercials and all of that. That is the new frontier. In movie theaters, on YouTube, on I don't think it's on Vimeo yet, but all of the social media channels that you see these people advertising through, we can advertise through there as well. Within 7 days of the Youth Congress page being published to Facebook, I think I spent $100 of my own money, and then we had 1,000 likes. So, 1,000 paid likes. So now, I'm not sure where it is now, but I know the engagement of the Youth Congress page for Freedom Summer. When I looked at it before things started, I think our engagement, meaning that these are people who are actively engaging or have seen a post or commented or liked, was over 10,000. And we've been talking about freedom and a whole bunch of other stuff that go along with freedom. So, any questions? Let's get it, and we can rock out. Let's get it.
Woo!
Education, information, collaboration.
Yep.
If you could sell those T-shirts with no budget and just talking, imagine what major conglomerates do with $1 billion budget.
Right.
So we are being tremendously influenced every day in practically everything that we do. If we want to have more control over how we think and how we spend our money and what we do, we have to become more capitalistic in the sense that we got to raise some money. We got to have some money. You got to have some money to be able to influence people, particularly when you have major conglomerates with billion-dollar budgets, with Harvard-trained marketing people. So that's the bottom line. And the masses of people are not going to be allowed just to go and spend their money any way they want to whenever they get ready. If I have knowledge of psychology and access to marketing, I'm going to be influencing you.
Yep.
And if you and the only thing, even though my influence may have an adverse effect on you, I'm going to do it anyway if you don't know. Look at what the tobacco industry did. Sold tobacco, sold cigarettes, knowing that it would cause cancer. So this is a serious thing. You have to really be serious. Our young people have to really be taught and trained about the importance of economic development and the importance of being able to have money such that you can support those things that are important to you. So what we're going to do now is have questions. Please come to the mic.
Hi, everybody. I know everybody except you really well, but my name's Monique Davis. I'm the mother of 6, breastfed them all the last for almost 2.5 years. I'm an extended breastfeeder. But my question is, in doing that and being kind of an activist and participating in Starbucks sit-ins in my hometown of Washington, D.C., I find one of the issues is that women aren't used to seeing other women because most of this generation hasn't been breastfed. And I was wondering if part of your campaign was developing, I just came from the arts and activists, so I think if we could develop artistic images and visual images that honor that breastfeeding mother while not denigrating women who have to choose bottle formula because of working reasons. We don't want to shame anybody in their choice, but we want to lift up and get people used to seeing a woman nursing. Because I remember my own grandparents. What are you doing that? I mean, just the visceral reaction some people have in restaurants making you go to the bathroom to nurse. And I'm saying, well, you're eating, why can't the baby eat? I mean, I just think there's such a public awareness campaign. And I was wondering if your organization has thought about kind of the artistic visual image piece.
First, to the point of the shaming, of moms who do formula feed and who do bottle feed, that's real, right? So we're doing this campaign. We're trying to bring light to formula. This is, and I saw people's faces when I was giving the facts about formula, and trust me, that's how I felt too. And I think that's real. Like, how do we not shame moms, but how do we still bring light and bring awareness? And I think arts is the perfect way, right? Using cultures and using mediums that are already inherent to our communities. So the neighborhood that Power U was founded in is called Overtown. It was called the Harlem of the South. That's where all the Black artists went to go. When they couldn't stay on Miami Beach, when they were performing, they stayed in Overtown. And predominantly Black neighborhood, very, very thriving until I-95 was built right through it. And now we have blight, drug use, we have displacement, we fights against gentrification that we unfortunately have been losing, right? But, we're still in Overtown, right? And talking to moms in Overtown, I remember when we first even started thinking about this campaign, I was in high school and I was at a meeting with some of the elders in the organization, and we were watching a documentary about midwifery in Overtown. And the conversation got to start talking about, what happened to these things that we used to do when our moms used to breastfeed, when the midwives were the primary caregivers and practitioners. We didn't have physicians because this is a Black neighborhood. We had our Black doctors and stuff, but most of the poor folks, they got their care from the midwives. What happened to that? And then get that conversation going to this generational gap. There's a gap in time where people started breastfeeding. People stopped going up around these images of breastfeeding. So one of the things that we did, we sat around and we talked about the marketing and the promotion. How could we bring images of Black mothers breastfeeding to the community? How can we do that? So one of the things that we did early on in the campaign, I wasn't on staff yet, I was still doing youth work, was that we worked with a local artist in the community, a college student, and we painted this beautiful mural right in the middle of the neighborhood that was designed by the moms. We had a whole day where we just all together painted and laid out the plans. And brought the different pieces and put up the mural right in the community, right on a corner store that didn't sell the best food. We talk about food deserts. Overtown in Miami is a first food desert. First food being breast milk. But that was huge, right? People driving past and seeing literally a mom breastfeeding, holding the baby. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful mural. And recently, what we've been doing, in addition to the mural. Now that we've won the campaign and we're realizing, okay, this policy change isn't enough. Doing it from the top, getting the institutions to change, that's great, that's a win, but we have to build consciousness, we have to keep bringing these images, we have to keep bringing light to breastfeeding and promoting it. So what we've been doing right now is, something simple as, in our newsletter, every week profiling a mom who's breastfeeding, right? Bringing in poetry, bringing in stories of moms who are breastfeeding. One of the things that we want to do with some stories that we have of moms who have had traumatic birth experiences and who have had healing experiences through breastfeeding, taking this story bank that we have and bringing it to film, right? Making these images, and not just for wider, larger, awareness around our campaign, but really to proliferate these images as much as we can. Black moms are still breastfeeding. It's still a part of our culture. It's still a part of our community. So thank you. Great question. And you're actually helping the wheels roll in my head of what else we can do in terms of arts and culture.
Great question, great answer. We're going to ask the panelists so that we can entertain the greatest number of questions.
I had a question, I guess, related to LGBTQI youth and health and education. And when you think about youth of color, there's sort of a really popular narrative that if you're brown and you're queer, you're going to have a particularly challenging time because of your peers and your family and your religion and all that sort of like an accepted rhetoric as far as creating safety for young people. And when you talk about sort of ways to aid youth of color who are queer, it comes to the dialogue is more focused on finding safe place for them and like assisting them and coping in the face of like tremendous hatred. Like it asks them to sort of accept their otherness without really challenging the others who kind of create that the environment that they have to live in. So my question to I guess you two is what work are you doing with those who don't identify as LGBTQI so that the onus and responsibility of being safe isn't fully on the youth, and so that some of the policy that you guys are trying to push has greater support because it's a matter of safety for all young people and not just protecting queer young people.
Absolutely. So, and thank you for that. You know, I've had conversations with people a lot when we're talking about LGBT youth, especially LGBT youth of color, that we always make their lives seem like they're always at risk of something, or that they're just at risk young people. And I'm like, that doesn't mean that just because this person identifies this way that they are at risk of everything. So one of the things that I do a great deal of youth leadership training with LGBT youth and with allies. And then I have a lot of conversations with folks, as you were saying before, if we're gonna have change happen, we need to have women of color in those leadership positions. I have these same conversations with community members in general. The work that I'm doing in Alabama, I've done civil rights work for a long time. Well, I say a long time, I'm not that old, y'all, sorry. For most of my adult life. But the conversations I have is that, you know, we can't look at as LGBT youth, especially LGBT youth of color, as other all the time, where they need to be just as included in any of these conversations we're having when we're talking about school safety. We also talk about youth that identify that way, but also some youth that are perceived to be. And even if they don't identify that way, they are still being bullied, or they're still not necessarily being given the same opportunities as some other young people. So for me, and for lack of a better word, it's normalizing the community. I personally, I'm gonna come out to all y'all, I'm a lesbian. When I have conversations with folks and they meet me, they don't realize that. And so sometimes I have people say different things to me that they wouldn't normally say, which is fascinating. And then I let them say what they're gonna say, and then I have a conversation and say, now you see that there's been the climate just changed completely because of how you were assuming I might personally identify. And that is an issue when it comes down to you're saying you're an ally, but you were just talking completely off the wagon on whatever opinion you might have, but that's not what you're going to say out in the public to other people. So it's having having conversations with people, and sometimes uncomfortable conversations, and saying we can have this safe space to say what you might need to say and ask the questions you need to ask, and then we can have this honest conversation of what type of language is okay and how we need to be talking to and respecting other folks in our community as a whole.
This is related. My name is Kevin Magruder. I'm a history professor at Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. But before moving there, I lived in New York for a long time, and I'm still involved with some organizations in New York. And one that I think connects with some of the work that you're doing, Ashley, is a group called LGBT Faith Leaders of African Descent. And what we're doing is the church is at the center of a lot of the problems. Even for people who never even set foot in the church, they use what they think is the rhetoric of the church to fuel their hatred. And so what we are doing is bringing forward the voices of affirming Black ministers, clergy, lay people. They are there, but the hostile voices drown them out. And so we're providing platforms for them to bring their messages so people can hear them. There is a spectrum of Christian belief across the country, but when you say Christian now, there's an assumption that it's the extreme conservative right wing, and that's not true among the white community or the Black community. And so finding places for those voices to come out. And I'm wondering, in terms of HRC's work, are you doing things with religious organizations across the country? What role are you seeing them play? Particularly, and I really mean Black clergy. What role are they playing as allies? Are you seeing?
I'm so happy you brought that up, actually. You know, my mom is a minister. I'm from right here in Jackson, Mississippi. And, you know, growing up in that space, I was able to see where I was growing up specifically, I was able to see the true definition of what Christian is supposed to be. We're a very welcoming space. There was, you know, great family. I was there all the time. That was my second home. And so it's really frustrating when I see, as you were saying, these extreme folks who are taking the fundamental, they're taking all of the the joy and the love and the acceptance of the Christian community, and they're using that for something else. So now some folks are afraid to say, yes, I'm Christian in certain spaces, and that's not fair. Even if you don't identify as Christian, whatever that religion might be, if you have folks that are taking that over and using it for hate, it's also making a horrible space for the folks that identify as that as well. But I will say, with HRC, there's a whole department of folks that are in the religion and faith department that do work in all different types of faith communities. We have a group of folks, actually my colleague Joe Ward was here earlier, he had to go back to DC, but he is there with the new Project One America that we've recently launched, where we're focusing on some southern states, Mississippi, Alabama, and Arkansas. He's the director of the religion and faith programming. And so we are actively working in all of these southern states and other states as well with Black clergy members, and they are a part of advisory committees that we have when we're talking about policy change, when we're talking about changing the hearts and minds in the community. So we are definitely doing work in the community, and we actually will hire in each of those 3 states a faith and religion community organizer to make sure that they are engaging all of the faith leaders, especially African American faith leaders in the states.
How you doing? My name is Xavier Levy. I'm from right here in Jackson. Currently, I'm directing and organizing a small youth ministry at my church with about 10 to 15 youth in the teenage age bracket. And we just had a meeting on Wednesday, and I didn't find out about what was going on here at Tougaloo this week until about Wednesday. But when I addressed my youth at church that day, we kind of talked a little bit about music and the different things that artists are marketing to you, and to pay attention and to listen. Out of the 10 that were there, 100% of them knew who Lil Boosie was. Of course, everybody knew who Lil Boosie was. And they knew that he had a concert coming up on 4th of July. 20% of them knew what Freedom Summer was. And, that's only about 2 in case, you don't know the percentage. Well, that was a huge difference, to me. Like, wow, nobody knew what Freedom Summer was. So when I told them about today's events and I invited them to come, only one of them showed up. He came with me right there. So we want to give his name to the So, like I said, I extended the invitation to everyone. However, I only got 10% of them to actually want to come. Well, actually, one of them wanted to come, but he was going to be out of town. So my question, I guess, is what I know that the marketing and the system is institutionalized, been around for a while. So, like, what do we do to kind of break that barrier? And why do we think that the negative marketing or the unhealthy marketing is more effective rather than positive with our youth?
The people who are over the budget, all right, the reason why they know about Lil Boosie is because somebody got paid to put out flyers, and they advertised on the radio, and they ran a TV commercial. And the TV commercial and the radio ad and the flyer spoke to those 10 kids, right? What we aim to do as far as the Youth Congress Committee, we created a flyer. It was colorful. It wasn't as attractive as I thought it needed to be, but I had to operate within the confines of the committee, which I was sitting in. The people who over the budget didn't want to put up enough money for radio. The TV ads that they ran marketed to folks who are 35 or older. And the committee that we had in terms of the young people and the, I guess you say, the step up from young people like me, it was only so many of us that could commit our time or petition our immediate supervisor to allow us to commit our time to do this. Meaning that I'm going to Murrah, I'm going to Hazelhurst, I'm going to Callaway, I'm going to Walton Brown, and I'm telling all of the kids that are in this school over, 4 or 5 months, like, hey, this is what we got going on. Tell all your friends, your parents, here's the registration link and all of that. But we, and I'm saying we because I'm putting myself into it, our organizations always commit the majority of our dollars in the wrong line item.
The other thing is, in order to counteract the propaganda and brainwashing that our young people are exposed to every day, we're going to have to, our efforts are going to be equally intense.
Yeah.
We're going to have to talk about Freedom Summer every day, every day, every day. When Mega was alive, I was the president of the NAACP Youth Strategy Committee. We met every night, every night, every night, every night. We were on a mission. So the mission has to be above and beyond just coming here today.
Right.
The mission has to be something else. And so, let's remember now, we have to counteract an influence on our thinking that's daily.
And what I mean by resources, I ain't talking about just money. I'm talking about people, time, like whatever the project is that you might be working on, that resource shouldn't be committed to that. And we can talk more about it later.
I'm Robert Smith, and Dr. Summers has already sort of introduced me. And I'm just here to thank Dr. Summers, who I've known for decades, and the rest of this panel for giving you your time and effort to conduct such a wonderful panel. I'm very delighted that we could be inclusive, and we obviously need to continue this. I want to make one statement, and it's not in defense of the medical community at all, but we do find ourselves sometimes in a bind, reference to information and who is entitled to information. Once upon a time, two doctors could get together and decide almost who anybody in this room was crazy and have them committed. Well, one of the things that came out of the civil rights movement was to give the patients more rights. And sometimes I think that's maybe have gone a little too far. But anyway, we have people now who, as you know, are homicidal and sometimes suicidal. But we basically have our hands tied if that person doesn't want that information to be shared. So it's a very tight thing, and Tim can correct me if I'm wrong. There are only two or maybe three situations where we are required to report a situation. As you may recall with Hinckley, and I want to be very short in the interest of time, he told his psychiatrist that he was going to kill the president, and his psychiatrist didn't tell anybody. And of course, his psychiatrist almost went to jail because of that. Now, we are required to report a patient who comes to tell us that they're going to kill the president. And we also are required to report certain infectious diseases such as HIV. But other than that, sometimes wives and sometimes husbands tell me that they don't want X to go. And really, you can also be sued for that.
I just want to say that Dr. Smith is not just a physician. Dr. Smith is one of the civil rights advocates. He's one of the pioneers in the community when black physicians couldn't go to hospitals. Dr. Smith was practicing medicine. I remember one time when I was a medical student, I had the opportunity to work in Dr. Smith's office, and there were times when he would have to go to the back of the hospital where they treated the black patients because they didn't let him. Dr. Smith has allowed many, many young people like myself, well, I'm not so young now, but I was young then, to train in his office. And I'm just saying that because he really, I can't tell you enough about him, and time won't allow me to. But let's give Dr. Smith a hand, because he's a tremendous. Dr. Smith could tell us a lot of stuff about civil rights and the movement, but time won't permit. So, next question.
HIV, that's my background. Came from testing, education, to advocacy. Now I started my own organization to work with people living with HIV. It's a lot of work out here for prevention, but we have to talk to people who are living with HIV. We don't have them at the table. We don't have them, making the decisions. So I would love to see a health agenda as well, because we don't want to talk about health, but healthy people This is my motto. Healthy people pay taxes. Thank you.
That's right. That's great. That's the truth.
And just to give a response to that, the example that I give is when you see October come around and everything's pink, like that's cool, right? So what's pink? That's marketing. All right. Now we got red. Yeah, heart disease, right? Red dress, February. Red been AIDS awareness, right? Now it's been co-opted by heart disease. So the things that are cool to talk about are things that, happen to you. And everybody looks at HIV AIDS like this is something that you did to yourself.
Hi, my name's Mary Rove. I'm actually from the Mississippi Delta on the Arkansas side. Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And I'm actually a faculty member at Northern Arizona University, and I teach anthropology and ethnic studies. And this is really, I'm very excited for August. My students are not going to know it hit them. But my question is after this conference, my question for all of you that has to do with the health and holistic health and well-being of our young people, of our children, as a survivor of sexual abuse, all of our children, all ages, all races, ethnicities, all socioeconomic backgrounds in globally are just being preyed upon. Last week, hearing about the FBI starting to be more proactive about breaking up child pedophilia rings, rescuing children, teenagers, including 2 in Arkansas. Just thinking about now there's a global network. You talk about marketing and promotions and how the internet and social media, I think, is very organized in this not so underground endeavor. It's also a prevalent form of modern day slavery. It's called human trafficking, but it's really slavery. And I just think with education and outreach, in terms of starting from the womb, in terms of, including with the breastfeeding awareness, how is this affecting our LGBT children and youth who are even more susceptible to being homeless, to being pimped? Literally, we're talking about pimping, so being pimped literally. Yep. And again, how can we develop some kind of holistic, multi-institutional kind of campaign that also does include the marketing and the promotions that makes it cool to talk about this and bring this issue out of the closet, because this is pervasive and it's multi-generational and it just doesn't seem to be going anywhere.
Yeah, most of the adolescents that I treat in the hospital are victims of trauma, and Mississippi is a little bit behind the rest of the country in recognizing the adverse psychological consequences of trauma. There was a time if I got a psychiatric history from someone, I didn't have a category of trauma, but now that's not true. Now we have a category of trauma. The Mississippi Mental Health Board now is requiring all the community mental health centers and everyone who's involved in providing mental health services to adolescents to become knowledgeable about trauma. And so that's after the fact part. But a lot of times when you're treating someone and you're engaging in trauma, the first thing you want to do is make certain that the trauma is not ongoing. So if you know that the child has been traumatized and you bring the perpetrator there, now you can say, okay, this has to stop. So that can help, but you've already had some damage done, and once trauma is done, it's quite a thing to undo. So we are more aware, paying more attention, putting forth more treatment effort. Now what we have to do is put forth more effort on the prevention part. And that's going to be more challenging because children are being victimized by their mama's boyfriend, their grandfather, their daddy, the stepdaddy, the mama, the lady next door, the teacher, the preacher, the psychiatrist. Everybody is preying on children now. So it's a horrific problem, and it's one that we definitely need to give more attention to.
And talking to kids about their bodies and using the correct words for body parts and letting them know and asking them, well, what is that? That's a vagina. Okay. Now you know that if somebody touches you there and that, then you need to tell me. You're not in trouble. You didn't do anything wrong. And I think that's, unfortunately, we're in a space of where we might have had, that young person might have had a parent that was also abused, and they were never taught to talk about it. And it was, you don't talk about that, you keep it quiet. So it's just this cycle of abuse.
You would be surprised at the number of moms who know that their children are being sexually abused, but they do nothing about it because they're dependent on this man. Yep. They're living in his house, or he's helping to pay the bills, or they're sexually obsessed with him. So you'd be surprised. A lot of children, they come and tell, or they don't tell, and they don't tell because they know that their mama is going to be mad with them, or they're going to think mom is going to think that it was their fault, they did it. And but this is a big problem. It really, really is, because even it takes a lot of work to help a child who's been sexually abused. And then in addition to that, we also, have children who are not only sexually abused, but emotionally and physically abused as well. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'd like to quickly respond to what you said as well. My apologies, but that's extremely important, And I think it's not a priority of folks doing reproductive justice work, not a priority of a lot of civil rights spaces. It's a secret. It's a skeleton literally in the closet. And for us, we've been in a lot of spaces and thinking with our leaders and strategizing of what would organizing against sexual abuse look like in our communities. This is a problem. We need to stop it. What's the role of survivors? What is the role of families? And when I talk about Black women's leadership, this is especially important in this, because what's the role of the grandma, of the mother, of the daughter? How do we really do with real intergenerational organizing, communication, relationship building? This is something that can be addressed in a way that's not only going to end it, but transform people who have experienced it, transform families, transform communities. I've met women who have been healed in a lot of ways from their sexual abuse trauma through having birth experiences, at home birth experiences that they were supported in and that they led themselves, right? So there's the different ways that we as women can support each other, and we can support people in our families as well. And it's possible through organizing as well, I believe, to address it.
Yeah. My name is Louis West. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I'm a proud graduate of Tools College. I have to get that out. My wife, in her agency from St. Louis, goes around the country and does seminars on Black infant mortality. One of the more disturbing things that we have discovered is that African American women, no matter how much money they make or what economic status they're in, have the highest rate of any woman on the face of the planet. My question for the panel may be related to other related subjects. How do you think the system and the fight for freedom has affected our Black women and their ability to have children, and how has that impacted the gay community as far as discrimination and maybe in the marketing situation? How do you think this system of oppression has affected each one of your areas?
Infant mortality is usually used as a way to sort of gauge the well-being of a country. Exactly. Thank you for the definition. Right. So, okay, on the outset, America's infant mortality rate, I don't know the number, but it's, indicates our prosperity, whatever. But when you look at the Black infant mortality rate, the disparity, what does that say about the well-being of the Black community and the well-being, and most importantly, the oppression, the systematic oppression, the degradation, and the years and years and years of histories in there, starting from slavery. We're talking about breastfeeding, and, our women were wet nurses. Yes. That's where we at. We talk about, and in terms of that question around, even after all these years of education, I read a statistic, and we quote a lot in our report about how Black women with 15 years of education have the same infant mortality rate as white women with a high school, right, with a high school diploma. And poverty, controlling for poverty as well. Black women have higher infant mortality rates than Hispanic and Latino women who are way, less, who have lower income and lower educational attainment, right? So these are real questions, but unfortunately, when you really dig deep, when you do the research, there's still a lot of question marks around Black infant mortality. What is going on? Stress, if you read on websites or on CDC, racism, quote unquote, is identified but not really explained or explored and how that works, right? So for us, it was important, and it's constantly important, to come together as a community, as Black folks, as Black women, and think about what is happening now. Doing listening, doing storytelling, doing community-led research, at least so we can see, we don't know what's happening nationwide, and this could take millions of dollars of research that nobody's funding, by the way, but we can take whatever money we have together and bootstrap it to figure out what needs to be done in Miami. And we figured one of the things was breastfeeding, right? And I think, my particular, mission and ours at Power U is to continue that conversation and continuing pushing it and continuing asking these questions while also mainly building the consciousness and building awareness in our communities, talking about it, bringing the information to the people, doing the guerrilla street teamwork, and continuing, if nobody's going to fund our research, doing it ourselves.
Exactly.
The Health Development Center, the Women's Health Development Center has a program that specifically focuses on maternal child health in the Mississippi Delta. It's called the Delta Healthy Start Initiative. They go and present everywhere. These are my co-workers, and some of them, you probably met some of them. Ms. Barbara Brooks, she's been volunteering. All of us, too, folks have been volunteering this week. We probably not going to know how to act next week. We have to go back and like be in the desk or whatever. But the work that they're doing between Greenville and Marks and in that Mississippi Delta area has been awesome. And one of the things that they've been able to do in terms of decreasing those rates is they've involved, that co-parent or, that young man, because they're focusing on teenage mothers as well as, other folks that rise above that age bracket. And then now they're doing tracking between, whether or not the mother is in school, after high school, and we're trying to create this pipeline between what they have up there in the Delta and getting those kids here to Tuvalu. One of the things that we run into as far as a roadblock is how do we get childcare here on campus, for one. And I can't say it's a roadblock, we just haven't had all the resources to line up and say, all right, young women who come to Tuvalu and have kids have a living situation as well as childcare situation that would make it easier for them to come to Tuvalu and go to school. The other thing that I think that causes what the thoughts that came to me in terms of Black women having high rates of infant mortality is the Office of Minority Health funded some projects to where we were doing preconception period education. They had this documentary that evidenced everything that y'all just talked about in terms of this lady had a PhD, she had a JD, MD. There you go. You know what I'm talking about. I showed it on campus 1,000 times almost. Now I didn't get as many kids as I wanted to, but I got a few. And then I began to get more peer educators, and we started to talk about preconception health. So how many of us are actually every day taking our vitamins to where in the event that we become pregnant or as a co-parent or a partner that we have been putting these things in place to where we are nutritionally efficient. All right, so if we don't know about vitamins for ourselves, we in the chapter. We sure don't know about the prenatal vitamins or prenatal care that goes along into making sure that our babies are developing healthy in utero. So between all of the things that we have in terms of preconception health for ourselves, not this like before we even get a baby, but then also when we have young women and young men who get together and have kids, but, before they even graduate high school, what are the conversations that they're having about how to care for the baby? So do I know the best way to hold the baby? Do I know how to change a diaper, what to put on the baby's bottom? All of those things contribute to us having high rates of infant mortality. So stress, and Ms. Monique, when you said stress, and I was like, that's really the biggest one, because if I'm black in America, I'm stressed out every day. I got insurance. I'm talking about car insurance. We got home insurance. We got health insurance. I got dental insurance. And when I get pulled over by the police, I let all 4 windows down. Because what am I? I'm black in America, and because of where I live in Jackson, Mississippi, if I'm on the other side of the county line, Ridgely and Madison pulled me over, I'm in a stressing situation, and I'm worried about what can happen. So if you're a black woman, and imagine if you got a husband or a boyfriend, you worried about him, you worried about your child, and then you get to work. Let's say you're the only black lady at work. You got a whole list of things that they made a pretty funny post about on the internet of what you have to deal with being the only black person in your job. Now, when you look at all three of those things that I just rolled out, and you really unpack that, that's why kids dying, because they coming in the world stressed out. And they behind the 8 ball. So, all of the work that we're doing in terms of social justice and making sure that we're promoting freedom and freedom lifestyle, once we get to the point where we're supporting businesses that support us as a community, then things will become less stressful. It'll become a less stressful environment. So all of that will play a role in making sure that our babies live.
Any other questions?
Go get tested.
Well, let's give our
Panel a round of applause. Thank you very much for your attention.